Once, in the heart of northwestern Iran, there was a lake so vast that it could be seen from space. Lake Urmia stretched across the horizon like an inland sea, its shimmering waters reflecting the sky, its shores coated with natural white salt that glowed under the sun. For centuries, this lake was not just a body of water. It was a living system, a climate regulator, a source of life for millions, and a symbol of balance between nature and human civilization. Today, that lake is almost gone. What remains is a haunting landscape of cracked salt plains, abandoned boats, dying villages, and toxic dust storms. The destruction of Lake Urmia did not happen overnight. It was not caused by a single drought or a single mistake. It was the result of decades of political decisions, poor water management, unchecked development, and a belief that nature could be controlled without consequences. Lake Urmia was once the largest lake in the Middle East and one of the saltiest lakes in the world, comparable to the Great Salt Lake in the United States. It covered an area of more than 5,000 square kilometers at its peak and supported a unique ecosystem. The lake was home to brine shrimp, migratory birds like flamingos and pelicans, and dozens of wetland habitats that depended on its water. Around the lake lived millions of people, farmers, fishermen, traders, and families whose lives were deeply tied to its existence. The lake moderated the regional climate, cooling summers, warming winters, and preventing extreme weather. For generations, Lake Urmia was stable, resilient, and alive. The turning point came in the second half of the 20th century, when Iran began aggressively pursuing agricultural expansion and infrastructure development. Following population growth and political changes, especially after the 1979 Islamic Revolution, self-sufficiency in food production became a national priority. Water, once treated as a shared and limited resource, became a tool for economic and political goals. Rivers flowing into Lake Urmia were no longer seen as lifelines for the lake, but as opportunities to expand farmland, generate power, and assert control over nature. More than 60 rivers and streams once fed Lake Urmia. Over time, most of them were dammed, diverted, or drained. Iran built dozens of dams in the lake's watershed, officially to support agriculture and provide water security. In reality, many of these projects were approved without proper environmental studies. Water that once naturally flowed into the lake was trapped upstream, redirected to farms, or lost to inefficient irrigation systems. Each dam reduced the lake's inflow, slowly starving it of the water it needed to survive. At the same time, agriculture around Lake Urmia expanded rapidly. Farmers were encouraged to grow water-intensive crops such as apples, sugar beets, and wheat in a region that was never meant to support such demands. Traditional farming methods, which had once worked in harmony with seasonal water availability, were replaced by modern but inefficient irrigation techniques. Open canals leaked water. Flood irrigation wasted enormous amounts. Groundwater wells were drilled deeper and deeper, draining underground aquifers that once helped stabilize the ecosystem. As more water was taken from the basin, less and less reached the lake. One of the most controversial projects was the construction of a causeway across Lake Urmia in the early 2000s. The road was built to connect the cities of Tabriz and Urmia, cutting travel time and boosting regional trade. But the causeway effectively split the lake into two parts, disrupting natural water circulation. A narrow opening was left for water flow, but it was insufficient. Salinity levels began to rise unevenly, damaging the lake's fragile biological balance. What was presented as a symbol of progress became another nail in the coffin. Climate change did play a role, but it was not the main cause. Periodic droughts have always occurred in the region, and Lake Urmia had survived them for centuries. What made this time different was that the lake no longer had a buffer. With rivers blocked, groundwater depleted, and inflows reduced to a trickle, even mild droughts became catastrophic. Evaporation accelerated, water levels dropped sharply, and vast areas of the lake bed were exposed. As the water retreated, the salt remained. Thick layers of salt covered the dry lake bed, turning it into a desert of white poison. Winds began lifting salt particles into the air, creating salt storms that spread across nearby cities and farmland. These storms damaged crops, contaminated soil, and caused respiratory illnesses among local populations. Fields that had once benefited from the lake's climate moderation became infertile. Orchards withered. Farmers who had once depended on the lake were forced to abandon their land. The human cost of Lake Urmia's destruction has been immense. Millions of people living around the lake have faced economic collapse, health problems, and displacement. Entire villages have been emptied as farming became impossible. Salt infiltration into groundwater has made drinking water unsafe in many areas. Doctors in the region have reported increases in asthma, eye diseases, and skin conditions linked to salt dust. What was once a source of life has become a source of suffering. Despite clear warning signs, authorities were slow to act. For years, scientists, environmentalists, and local communities raised alarms about the lake's decline. Their warnings were often ignored, downplayed, or dismissed as exaggerated. Admitting the scale of the disaster would have meant admitting decades of policy failure. Environmental concerns were repeatedly sacrificed for short-term economic and political gains. By the time the Iranian government officially acknowledged the crisis, Lake Urmia had already lost more than 80% of its water. Emergency plans were announced, restoration committees were formed, and billions of dollars were promised. Some dams were partially opened and water transfers were proposed from other basins. However, restoring a lake is far more difficult than destroying one. Years of mismanagement cannot be undone overnight, especially when water scarcity affects the entire country. Efforts to save Lake Urmia have faced numerous obstacles. Farmers already struggling resist water restrictions that threaten their livelihoods. Political tensions complicate cooperation between provinces sharing the watershed. Large-scale water transfer projects raise concerns about creating new environmental disasters elsewhere. Meanwhile, climate change continues to intensify heat and evaporation, making recovery even harder. Lake Urmia's story is not just about Iran. It is a warning to the world. Across the globe, lakes, rivers, and aquifers are being pushed beyond their limits. From the Aral Sea to Lake Chad, history shows the same pattern: ambitious development, ignored warnings, environmental collapse, and human suffering. What makes Lake Urmia especially tragic is that its destruction was entirely preventable. The science was clear. The risks were known. The consequences were predictable. Today, parts of Lake Urmia occasionally show signs of recovery after wet years, offering brief hope. But these moments are fragile and temporary. Without fundamental changes in water management, agriculture, and environmental governance, the lake remains on the brink. True restoration would require reducing water consumption, changing crop patterns, modernizing irrigation, and accepting that economic growth cannot come at the expense of ecological survival. The destruction of Lake Urmia reveals a deeper truth about power and responsibility. Governments can build dams, redirect rivers, and reshape landscapes, but they cannot rewrite the laws of nature. Water systems are interconnected, delicate, and unforgiving. When they collapse, the damage spreads far beyond the environment, reaching into health, economy, and social stability. Lake Urmia was once a mirror reflecting the sky, a sanctuary for birds, and a lifeline for millions. Its near disappearance stands as one of the largest environmental disasters in modern Middle Eastern history. It is a reminder that environmental collapse does not announce itself with a single dramatic moment. It happens slowly, quietly, decision by decision, until one day the water is gone and only salt remains. Whether Lake Urmia can truly be saved remains uncertain, but its story has already delivered its verdict. Development without sustainability is destruction. Ignoring science is negligence. And when nature is pushed too far, it does not negotiate. It responds.